Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force discussion panel this evening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sonny Brown. I'm the rector of All Saints in Roanoke Rapids and vicar of Church of the Savior in Jackson, and chair the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. And I am again thankful to have panelists here tonight and those who are coming to learn. The meeting is being recorded and will be available for those who weren't able to attend, who did register at our website only, viewable there after the meeting. So we'll begin with a prayer and then I will turn things over to our panelists. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, your Son, our Savior Jesus Christ, is the Prince of Peace. You bid us to be repairers of the breach and restorer of streets to live in. Help us to heed your call to end violence of all kinds, and especially for the violence wrought by guns and those who wield them. Be with us as we learn together this evening, with those who present, with those who listen. Give us discerning hearts and minds to listen to one another and for your spirit moving in our midst. We ask all of these things for your tender mercy's sake. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. We have different panelists and we do not have an order to go. Well, we do have an order to go in. I'll take that back. I'd first like to introduce Angela Compton Nelson from Holy Family in Chapel Hill. We also have Sarah Smith, who is a member of Church of the Holy Family in Chapel Hill, and they'll be first sharing with us about their experience and what they have done toward gun violence and weapons on property and the discussions they've had. For note purposes, if you'd like to ask a question, please put that in the chat box for now so that you don't forget what it is, because we're going to allow all the panelists to speak first and then save questions for after all the panelists have had the opportunity to share their experiences that they want to share. So if you have a question, again, place it in the chat box and we'll come to it. You can type those in as you have the question arise, and we'll address them once all the panelists have had their turns. Angela, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us what has been going on at Holy Family.
I am Angela Compton Nelson, and I'm the Associate Rector at Church of the Holy Family in Chapel Hill with Sarah Smith. And I am here basically to give an overview of what Holy Family has done over the past decade in the way of talking about gun violence and becoming a weapons-free campus. This process that I'm about to outline, which was an organic process, but started following the 2016 murders at Mother Emanuel AMEZ, which that became one of the sort of catalyst pieces for the conversations that we had. Another catalyst for the conversations that we had about being a weapons-free campus and about gun violence, or that we did have a couple of members who were packing in church. I know of at least two, but there could be more. That's just what we know of. And then at the time that these conversations started, which was around 2016, Sarah Smith was also sitting on our vestry and was really active in a lot of the conversations around legislation and gun violence in North Carolina, and had kind of raised some of the some of the concerns with the vestry. And then in 2016, the last thing that happened is that the North Carolina legislature passed a bill which allowed for the carrying of concealed weapons in houses of worship. And so all of those things together became the catalyst for our conversation. We broached the conversation with our vestry. I believe Sarah broached it, and she can maybe mention a few of the things that were at stake for her a little bit later. But we broached the conversation with our vestry, and it wasn't actually very controversial at Holy Family. I think a lot of people on our vestry were quite surprised to hear that anyone was actually concealed carrying at church. And there was a real desire and need to respond to some of the things that had been happening. So we very early on settled on becoming and posting that we were a weapons-free campus. And the question that we really had to answer and contend with was, what would the communications look like to the parish? What would the process look like? And what would the kind of concluding work that we had look like? So we started that process in 2016. Shortly after that, we started an emergency preparedness group, which had been on our task and to-do list for a fair bit of time. So we talked about things like tornado shelters, and we also talked about things like active shooters. At the time, we brought retired member of law enforcement on the campus to do a safety and security audit, and we didn't really see that as becoming an opportunity to bring law enforcement onto the campus. We just saw that as an information gathering exercise, just to kind of look at our space with different eyes. Meanwhile, our associate rector at the time, the Reverend Sarah Ball-Damberg, did a lot of work kind of gathering information about what other churches were doing in the area around Duke University's campus, because we are very close to Duke University, as well as some churches from around the country. And the Reverend Clark French, who was our rector at the time, contacted Christ Church Cathedral in Nashville, which had recently adopted a weapons-free policy on their campus as well. So in the process of all of this, we settled on a conversation with our vestry that was about having a designated a weapons-free policy was the first piece. We have the language for that policy tonight. I think Sarah maybe can share it in the chat if you'd like. To increase the communications around being a weapons-free campus for the parish, which included listing that in our bulletin on occasion, but not as a standing announcement, and posting our weapons-free campus policy in like a framed piece as you enter our foyer. And I believe in the narthex at the time as well. We didn't really have a lot of objections about this. So our vestry adopted this process in February of 2018. The biggest conversation that we had was what that signage should look like. There was a fair bit of resistance to posting imagery of guns or even language of gun-free campus visibly, in part because of the way that competes with liturgical imagery, things like the cross. It was the contention of our clergy and some of the folks working on this that we wanted the liturgical imagery of the cross and the church to speak the loudest, and for it to say something about who it was that we were, and we believed that that already entailed a resistance to gun violence and an embracing of Christian nonviolence. And so that is why we settled on posting the word policy. Sarah, do you want to add anything about that process?
Yeah, I think like I remember back to that time and sitting in the pews and thinking it had never occurred to me that someone might bring a weapon to church. And I had very, very little children at that time who were extremely squirmy in the pews. And another thing that had happened right around that time was that a weapon went off in a Catholic church, I think in Pennsylvania, where someone went up to communion and it went off at like standing or kneeling for communion. So that was also in my mind as another thing that could happen to church, happen at church, like with my kids, crawling onto someone's purse and a weapon going off. So I was very anxious and really relieved by a policy that would, I thought I just align with our values as well as, align with being a parent of young kids in the pews at the time.
My understanding from the time, and I was at Holy Family, but I was not one of the clergy at the time, is that we actually didn't receive very much resistance after posting the policy or after it was adopted by the vestry at all. Our rector at the time mentioned that he really only heard one person mention anything about it following, and I think anyone else who mentioned it did so positively. So that is the story at Holy Family, and I'm happy to take questions in the question time.
Thanks, Scott. Remember to put your questions in the chat box as they come to you about each church's experience, and we'll move to the High Point group. Would you all like to go next and introduce yourselves and share with us the experiences at St. Mary's High Point and what you've done there?
Yeah, this is Tim Yates. I'll do the High Point presentation, and John, you can jump in and add as you see or like. I've been at St. Mary's for 39 years. This is my third term on the vestry, and my seventh year as being junior warden. A little over 9 years ago, our former rector, the Reverend David Umflett, left and went to Greensboro, and Father Rob came to High Point, and one of the first things he did was formed a security committee, of which John Wall and I and three other people are members. In that first year of the security committee, we put together a campus security policy, which entailed how do we best protect our staff and our congregation during services and during work hours during the week. That was a year-long process, and we shared that with the congregation. We had previous discussions about guns on campus when Reverend Umflett was there, but we never really took any actions. It was controversial at that time, and it just didn't get done. So we started discussions before COVID about how we were going to handle gun violence and guns on campus, but really didn't get anything done until we came back and resumed meeting again after COVID in person. And at that time resumed having officers on campus on Sunday morning services as part of our regular security plan for the campuses in High Point. We began having discussions. We knew that we also had people that were concealed carrying during our services on Sunday morning, and it was rather disturbing and surprising to many. I'm an usher quite frequently, and I knew and saw them myself, and I think the staff was quite surprised too. We did several things. We talked to other churches in High Point to see what their position was, how they were handling things. We actually called in the High Point Police Department to ask them to look at our overall security plan, which they did at the time, and helped us tighten that up a little bit. And also, we asked them to share with us what experiences they had had with other businesses as well as churches in the community of High Point with regards to declaring themselves gun-free zones and posting those hideous signs on their buildings outside. And they were really adamant in saying those different buildings or ones that were taking that position with the signage were probably targeted more than those who just had a policy. So we were pretty pleased with the the analysis that we got from them that led us to the position that we wanted to be much more than just a gun-free zone, but we wanted to be a weapons-free zone. And it was at that point where we went to the diocese and asked them for the materials that were available. And that's what led us back to using some of the information that was there to form our position as a weapons-free facility. We developed a policy and we developed signage. John was heavily involved in the signage that we posted around at all of our campuses, visually on display. And the rector did a letter to the congregation. We expected the worst, and quite frankly, we had no complaints whatsoever. It was amazing. So we implemented our position there uh, without any kickback from the people in the congregation. One other thing I will mention to you, besides the not wanting to have the signage on the outside of the building, we talked with our insurance carrier about liabilities. And it was our understanding that if you have a policy of being a no weapons facility, that and hopefully in an unlikely event there is a shooting on your campus, that you can't be held liable. In other words, you can't be sued by the congregation for not having a position if there's an attack or a shooter on campus. So that's where we are. John, you have anything else to say?
Well, Tim, I think you did a great job of covering it. And like I say, you were on the vestry before I came, and then when I left, you had the good fortune to return to your position as junior warden. But yeah, basically the signage we put in all our buildings on the campuses, it's not in your face signage, but it's clearly where anybody coming in or going can see it, and it knows it's a no weapons zone. And it worked really well. And I think everybody that might have carried a weapon in the past, I think they realized that, like a lot of things, all this planning is good until something happens. And once chaos breaks out, some of the people that might have been carrying, you can't aim and shoot a weapon and know what's going to happen. And we just had to go over the levels of security, where we wanted to funnel the people to go when we were in church, make sure the spaces were opened up, the doors were unlocked, everybody had a smooth flow with the ushers, and it's worked out really well. I hate to say that we sort of expected might be the worst, but we were pleased that it worked out as well as it did. And I think that's a credit to our members and staff in the vestries for putting things together and just getting it to go as smoothly as it did. But I don't think you left anything out. And I think I haven't really heard that much about it at all since it's been done since I left vestry and everything. I think it's worked really well. That's all I can add. But once again, thank you for all you did, because you were there talking about it before I was on, and then things got a little bit worse, and we put something into words and got it in writing and made the decision, and it worked out for us. So we're glad we did it.
In speaking with Father Rob, I'd add, because he's attending another meeting right now, but as I think part of what came out of the conversations with the police department that you all mentioned having was also having off-duty police officers on Sunday mornings and at some other church events be present in a low-key way. Is that correct?
Yes, we have services at 8, 9, and 11. We have an off-duty officer we pay for the officer off duty. They are there from 8:30 to 12:30. We have two campuses. We have a community life center where we have an 8 o'clock and a 9 o'clock service, and they sit in a police vehicle in front of the building. But they also get out and walk around the property and around the building, so we want people to know that we have police presence during our service. And then after that service, they move across the street for the 11 o'clock service and do the same thing. They're seen and sometimes come in and walk around the building. I think our folks really appreciate, and it provides a level of security that's much appreciated by the members of our congregation. We also have them there on services on, particularly around Christmas.
And it does help the police department too, as well as St. Mary's, because we can develop a rapport with the different officers that are there. Our congregation sees them as people, friendly people, well-mannered, highly trained, and they see us as people that are appreciative of what they do and when they do it. So it's a two-way thing that it's good for both entities to have them helping us serve on Sundays. So we enjoy that.
I mean, I can't say enough about how much cooperation and advice and support that we have received in discussing security on our properties with our High Point Police Department. They have been absolutely incredible and are always available to help and to come and speak to us if we need them. So I don't know if you can get the same support from where you are, but I'm telling you, it's available.
Y'all are a testimony to Faith in Blue. You can ask me more about that. That's a real program that we also are encouraging folks to engage as Faith in Blue. So you guys should look into it if you haven't. But
we will.
We'll do that.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. We'll move to Catherine at St. Andrews in Greensboro. Catherine, tell us what's going on there.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be there and hear what others are doing and share what we've been accomplishing at St. Andrews. What we've been working on primarily, I would say, is learning and education, awareness and advocacy. We started discussing gun violence prevention in late 2023. I had been chatting with our rector, Reverend Jenny Inman, about it, and it's been an important issue to me for many, many years. And really discussing how we as people of faith can address this issue that affects so many people in our communities in so many horrible ways. So we began by in November of 2023, and we invited Sarah Smith to come and speak to us. As I don't know if she introduced herself as where she's from, but she is, of course, works for North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. And we'd gotten to know each other virtually over the past few years because of some volunteer work I do for NCGV. So she came and we had a program after church on Sunday. About once a month, we have what we call community conversations where the whole parish is invited. And I was fairly new to the parish, so I wasn't sure what the attitude would be and how it would work out. And I thought, well, if 30 people come, I'll be thrilled. But the parish hall was filled. And so that was really exciting. There was a lot of great energy. Sarah presented on the diocesan task force and also on the work that NCGV does and the priorities at that time. And we had a great discussion. As I said, lots of energy, lots of great participation. So after the holidays, a small group of us started to meet virtually every few weeks to talk about what we as a parish could do to address the issue. And we decided that first we really needed to educate ourselves and learn more about it. And so we did accomplish this using the curriculum from the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. And this is called the Courageous Conversations About Gun Violence. And that is 6 sessions. The link to their curriculum is on the task force webpage that Sunny was talking about. And you can download it from there. And I really highly recommend it. It is a treasure trove of information with links to videos and books and web pages and just all sorts of information. So we met during the summer of 2024, and we ended up having really good participation. We had at least 8 to 10 people every session. And folks from other parishes came, friends or family connected to St. Andrews, and they brought friends. And so we just had a really wonderful group, and we learned so much. Some of the topics include suicide, domestic violence, racism, the arms industry, and so lots of things that we just didn't really know, like such as the sadly, the largest percentage of gun deaths are from suicide and domestic violence. What we hear about are the horrific mass shootings, but they are really only a small percentage of the gun deaths. So lots of really great information there. So when we finished with that, we decided that we wanted to share what we learned with the parish. We, with all the scheduling, we didn't end up getting to that until this March. And we had what we used so we had another all parish meeting. And what we used is on the first session of the curriculum, they had a citizens test with 17 questions. And again, just it was a really good learning tool going through it. Some of it was true, false, some of it's multiple choice. But again, it just covers a lot of the misconceptions that people have and learning a broad spectrum on the topic of gun violence. And so we had people everyone was at a table, members of our group, a member of our group facilitated each table, did the citizens test, and then discussed the answers. And that's what we did in the study group during the summer at our first session. So again, we had really good participation, lots of good discussion at the tables, and then we reported out to the larger group and had a larger group discussion. So with that, this kind of created a little bit of a snowball. Soon after that, one of our ECW groups chapters went through the same process. And we also discussed how, well, we really want to meet with our youth, because these kids have grown up since kindergarten having these active shooter drills. And so several of us met with them just a couple of weeks ago. I approached the youth director, and she just jumped into that with both feet and was really excited about us coming. So again, we worked through the citizens test and the answers, and then just really wanted time for them to talk. And primarily they talked about active shooter and with the metal detectors they have to go through, and just the whole anxiety of worrying about when they go to the movies or go shopping, worrying about people with guns. So again, and we had a good, Martha, our youth director, said, well, the spring it can get a little, we don't have much attendance. There's proms and there's exams, but we had a really good group and a really active group there. Over the past couple of years, we've also participated in the postcard campaigns that the diocese promotes, and provided information on what was going on, usually things supplied by NCGV. I mean, the past year we talked about all of the awful bills that are going through our General Assembly right now, provided information about that. We had some handouts that how to find your legislator. We found a lot of people don't always know their state representatives, who they are. We also have a list of gun violence organizations, state and national, and local organizations and offices. And we keep those out. We have a little advocacy corner with lots of information about gun violence as well as other topics. We also last year we did participate in Wear Orange and had a really special litany that Reverend Jenny did during our service. And going forward, and what we've also been doing is we have a core group that I forward that's on the list for action alerts from NCGV, and hopefully they spread it out so when we get those action alerts about contacting our representatives, about the bills coming through. We do our best to get as many people as we can to send that information to our representatives. So that's the main advocacy part. And we've had notices about that in our newsletter. So that's where we are right now. We hope to continue with this, move and do more. And I invite any questions that people have.
Thanks, Catherine. That's a lot. Way to go.
We've been busy.
So, thanks for picking up the advocacy cards as well. That's awesome. Much appreciated. Okay. We'll move to Sandy. Sandy Key in St. Stephen's, Durham. Take it away, Sandy.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us a part of this. I sit on this task force and have been glad to be a part of it for some time now. Want to not only talk about St. Stephen's, but also just talk about what's kind of been a process of mine for many years. And as a clergy person up and down the East Coast, and particularly when in my last cure, when I was in Connecticut, St. John's and Stanford, we actually did a fire drill. So during the service, and we had the fire personnel actually in church, and we did a fire drill, really to kind of to see how the church would respond in a active situation, whether or not it's a fire or anything along those lines. And to my chagrin, nobody moved. And so it began a process for us to really to start thinking about and talking practically as a global system and not just within the leadership. So I arrived down in Durham in 22. First thing I started doing was looking at the systems and looking at the buildings and some of the possibilities that were presented to us. I am retired law enforcement, and I've served as a police chaplain and a fire chaplain for 25 plus years. So I walk into our building and I realize that all of our windows, and there are a mess load of them along the sides, which are all crank windows, are all shut because when they were painted last, they were not made to be used in their appropriate way. Nobody really thought to open them up and make them accessible. By making them accessible once again, we are able to use that as a potential drop point if we had a fire or we had a drill or we needed to get people out of church, because we were able to identify where the access points were, where were the potential places that people would be able to move if we had a active shooter response. An active shooter would be coming in through our main door because that was really the only access point that they had. But then once they entered in, I wanted our congregation to be able to split off to the sides and actually go through the windows and not have to access through the side doors, or more importantly, not to move towards the active shooter. So we've talked about that. That was talked about within our leadership. Our vestry has had conversations about that over time. Where it really came to play for us was a couple of years ago when another church, another Episcopal church in the Midwest named St. Stephen's, was involved in an active shooter situation on their campus. That hit home in a way that kind of surprised people. So within just a couple of days, we ended up having essentially a town hall meeting within our parish hall, where the whole of the congregation was invited, and also people in our community. The response was better than expected, and the conversation was not about whether or not we were going to have guns in the church or anything like that. That was not what we were talking about at the time. We were talking about safety. We were talking about how we as a congregation are going to remain safe. And we didn't place blame one way or the other. We really just wanted people to come in and have a conversation. We set up the room in a round circle. sorry, that's redundant. Set them up in a circle, and so that everybody felt like they were a part of an equal conversation. I facilitated the conversation, gave a couple of anecdotal pieces, and we talked about some of the really important pieces around what is it about having a gun. One of the things that I highlighted, for instance, is having a gun inside the sanctuary has great possible side effects that are not in any way good. The law enforcement people who walk into a church with firearms have one thing in mind. If they see somebody who has a gun, they're not able to determine who's the shooter and who's the protector. I don't want to have to do another funeral for somebody who's trying to protect the other people in my parish. Additionally, the conversation was pointed to, well, what if I'm carrying, but then when I get out of my car, I just put it in my glove seat, or I put it underneath my car, or in the glove box, or what can I do? And that's not going to be helpful at all either. So the encouragement is we invite people to put all handguns in their trunks and not even have them accessible. It's just yet one more safety security point so that they're not even in the congregational mindset. They're not sitting in the pews. They can have that personal carry agenda that they feel that they need to have coming to and from church. But once they're on campus, the gun is locked inside of their trunk. It's just a means and a way of helping to think through the positive sides, to meet people where they are, and to allow for a greater conversation. I've also had the opportunity to talk one-on-one with many of these individuals who sit on both sides of the camp, and to talk about it from both my perspective as clergy, my perspective as former law enforcement, my perspective of having to deal with trauma after shootings. There's a great deal of conversation when one or two people can meet who are on opposite sides, that sense of hearing the other by way of the church being that sacred space where conversations are available and hearing and listening is paramount. It's gone a long way towards helping people to feel a little bit better about our congregation and where different people might lie in the whole of the conversation. Additionally, one of the things that I've worked towards is a immediate and direct conversation with the law enforcement that serve our area. I went to the team that actually patrols our area, gave them an invitation to just come and sit in our parking lot on any time. And whenever I see them in a parking lot, whether or not they're there writing reports or they're just trying to kind of chill out for a minute, I always walk up to them. I keep my hands out to the side so that they see what I'm doing. I walk up and I ask them how they're doing and if they want a cup of coffee. Do they need to use the restroom? Do you want to get out and have a place where you can write your reports and just have a safe place for themselves? I'm trying to build a relationship and a rapport with them so that they have a good feeling about who we are at St. Stephen's. Then I've also invited the city of Durham to come in and do an assessment on our property. They have assessed 2 of our 3 buildings. We just finished a new building, and so that will have to be reassessed. The point of the reassessment and the idea of having law enforcement come in, what they're going to look for is they're going to look for places that somebody might hide. They're going to look for places that they need to identify so that when they're trying to clear a building, they already know how to clear the building and they're not worried about spaces and places that they weren't aware of before. That makes their clearance so much faster because they know the building. They also are introduced to my staff so that they know everybody who is supposed to be in the building at a given time. I've also done the same thing with our fire department. Our fire department actually sits on the corner of the property. So they could run there probably faster than drive there at times. They also know our building. They also know all of the ins and outs and how to get through. So it's really the most important part for me in this larger scheme of things is consistently maintaining a direct relationship with the people who are going to be there if you need them. The law enforcement reality is our best benefit is to have a nice and solid relationship. If you have extra food from a dinner that you've had, walk it down to the fire department. They'd love it. Walk it over to the local police department. Give them some snacks. Invite them to each of your events when you're having a big party or you're having something. Invite them, particularly the ones who are off duty, to come and to participate in your community events. Help them to feel like it is their place as much as it is your place. That relationship is, you can't go wrong by having a strong relationship with your law enforcement at this time. Thank you, Sonny.
Thanks, Andy. That's awesome. Especially the relationship building, which is also made possible by your experience with law enforcement that you bring to the table for your church and for this group. So thank you. I think we have engaged all of our panelists at this point. So I think we can, is that correct, Christine? Yes. So we can open the floor to questions. Are there any in the chat box, Christine?
There are. We had a question asking all the churches, how did you choose which doors to lock during services, when to do so, and should there be signage on the doors?
Sandy, go ahead.
Thank you. So we actually changed all the locks and the door systems so that they were exit only if they were not part of the main system. As I spoke about the windows, making sure the windows are accessible so that they can be used as a means of escape. But then the two fire doors that are on the end, they are access only either through a keypad, one of them, or the other one is an access through the inside out only. So the others are available through the ushers. We are privileged to have glass all the way through our narthex. So we see people coming from all directions.
Angela, were you about to speak to this as well?
Yeah, I was going to say that we do not have any locks on our doors aside from what is locked during off hours, and our nave remains unlocked and open all of the time. We didn't see our venturing into the conversation around gun violence as primarily one about the safety and security of the congregation. We did have some emergency preparedness plans. We did talk about exits and entrances for active shooter events. We did all of the audits with police and fire. But when it came to being a weapons-free campus, we saw that as part of our theological witness. And we primarily, in part because of that, we decided not to have an ongoing standing physical presence of police in our parking lot. We do have relationships with those, but those are not with those organizations, but they're not to the extent that I think some of the others are. And I think that is because we were not really centered on the safety and security conversation so much as the theological witness of the congregation.
Thanks, Angela. Okay. Any other questions, Christine?
There were a couple, and we do invite you all to share them in the chat if you've got them. So one question is, how do you enforce a gun-free policy? Or what do you do if someone comes to your church and disregards the policy you have in place? How do you handle that?
Good question. Have any of you all encountered that where someone was totally disregarded the policy that you have that's posted and no, you haven't had that? Do you have a plan for what you might say if it or what someone might do, the ushers or you all, if that were to arise?
We've
I did.
had, oh, go ahead, Sandy, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Angela. Go ahead. It's fine.
We've had adherence to our policy. We have had occasions where I believe the rector has had to say, this is a weapons-free campus, but everyone has sort of abided by that. I think our position is that if someone wasn't abiding by that and that they intended to do us harm, that is why, one reason why we did not center that safety and security conversation, because it is, a piece of paper and a policy is really limited in what it is that it's doing. And I think part of the logic is that anticipating every aspect of that danger feeds into the anxiety and concern that this is primarily an issue of safety and security, and that it's something we can control. And I think we wanted to be a part of the conversation around what it means for Christians to put their weapons down and what it
Mhm.
means to create that space. But we didn't really want to say like that means 100% of the time there will be safety and security on our campuses. I don't think we, went beyond that. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't guarantee that. Sandy?
Thank you. And I appreciate, Angela, what you're saying. And that's an extremely important position for us. So thank you. The thing that I have been able to do is when I've become aware of somebody who was carrying in church, I asked to have a conversation with them, and it was off time. And we just met in my office and we had a frank conversation about their need versus the need of the parish and what that felt like on that extensive level. We then talked about, well, why and how we might be able to do something different, which goes back to what we were able to do with the trunks, or even just a simple invitation to not even bring it when you're coming to church on Sundays, because it's the individual that's kind of at the angst point for us. And it's those individuals who have anxiety before they get to church that are the ones that are carrying the weapons. So when I had that conversation, explained our position and explained the position of the diocese, they were more than happy to leave the weapon in the trunk. And I've not had anybody to disregard it after we've had that conversation.
Others present that have questions for the panelists, and we'll take a stab at it.
Here's one that dovetails. How does making a campus weapons-free align with current state legislation around concealed carry? In other words, if the state is allowing individuals to conceal carry and loosening gun laws, are churches still allowed to prohibit weapons on their properties?
I would immediately want to turn to Sarah because Sarah is usually more informed, Sarah Smith, but I don't want to assume that she knows the answer. Sarah, do you know, or
Yeah, so we're definitely allowed to prohibit on religious properties. I think the law that passed in 2016 had to do with like there had to be some kind of signage. So that was part of our process at Holy Family, was to talk about how we would post a sign. We were also in the middle of a renovation, so we talked about, would we post a sign in the new parking lot space, and what would that look like? Part of the conversation for us was also like all we can do is ask. So it was posted in our bulletin for a long time rather than using signs for the reasons that Angela talked about. But kind of being vulnerable with all we can do is ask was like a place that we had to get comfortable with, because we weren't bringing metal detectors or law enforcement or any of the other things that could like ensure there would be no weapons, that it had to be in like, we kind of had to sit with that and be comfortable with that as part of our as part of the conversation and part of, you know, getting used to this concept that people might be bringing weapons. Like the most we could do is ask and hope that they respected that.
Thanks, Sarah.
We have a question for all the panelists. Gun violence is such a big problem. How can a church decide where to start if it's not being pulled or feeling called in a particular direction?
I think I can just momentarily speak to this. It's really hard for me to imagine that a church would not feel called to speak into the reality of gun violence, in particular when so many Christians are participating in it. And so I think being really honest about what is at stake in leaving the conversation on the table and why is it something that we don't want to venture into, or don't feel like there's anything at stake. I suspect or wonder if that would primarily come out of communities where that's just not really seen as a major concern. I think a really good place to start is basic education around gun violence, and the conversation around guns that is happening in the United States. I also think that particular stories that are connected to our congregations or to our clergy can be a starting place for those conversations. I found that to be the case in my own situation. I have a family member who was very involved in gun culture and the gun rights movement in Northern California, to the point of founding a militia in the 90s, but in the 2010s died from gun violence. And I always found the irony of that story to be something really important to share, because what it says is that the stories that are being told around guns and around their around the possibility of guns to create an atmosphere of safety is actually a myth. And so I think like education or stories can help people see what's at stake, and what's really at stake is truthfulness. And that's something that churches always have a stake in. So that's just what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I would agree with Angela, and that's why when our group started last year, as I mentioned, we really floundered around for a while. Well, what can we do? What should we do? And so we decided the first step really was to educate ourselves, which is why we formed the study group. And it's just and that curriculum really focuses on the theology and the spiritual aspects of the topic, and how, as I said before, what should people of faith be doing? It creates so much havoc in our communities and causes so much despair. And this is just something that we felt that the church should be addressing.
John or Rob, do you have anything to mention about that? Where did you start? There's so many ways so many ways to jump in, and where do you get started with something as vast as gun violence and gun violence prevention?
Well, I think you would maybe first just look at the instances in the papers, in the news, it doesn't matter if it happens at a church or not at a church, but the people that are hurt are basically part of God's creation. God gave everybody worth. So anybody that gets hurt in gun violence is somebody that could have been saved and should be saved. And sometimes you have to take little steps before you can take big steps. But I think it's always wise to look at saving anybody and everybody if you can. Can't always save everybody, but whatever you do that would lead to have any lives saved is a good thing. And I think a lot of times we don't always know why people do things, but if you don't have a gun, you can't get killed by a gun unless, you know, somebody else is perpetrating the crime. But it's sad that so many things are going on, yet government does not really do anything to help curb gun violence. You can do a lot with just making it, not saying more restrictive to get, but you should maybe increase an age limit, have more training with weapons. Just make sure that people are of, everybody wants to say, well, he had a mental issue. Well, why does he have a mental issue? There ought to be ways for people that have mental issues. A lot of families can't get the members of their family that might need help, get help from a mental issue. And if somebody's got a mental issue, they don't really need to be purchasing a weapon. But, you know, there's a lot of things you can do. It's not everybody can go the big step right at once, but just talk about saving lives.
I like your comment about knowing what is happening in your community so that we aren't just ignorant of things that happen at our own door in the block. We were aware at All Saints of shootings that happened in Roanoke Rapids, and we had a shooting that was a block away from the church on a Sunday morning during church that immediately made everyone aware of concern for the safety of the victims, the people who were fleeing, who were knocking on our door of the church during church service, the safety of all those who were in church if the gunman had approached the church or come into the church. That was a change for us. And then in learning about our community, that did spark, that event did spark learning more. And we learned that within a 5-minute drive of the front doors of our church, murder and shooting violence were higher than the national average around our community, which was disturbing. But having a gunshot event within a block on a Sunday morning definitely opened everyone's eyes to it. So knowing community can lead you to take action and start to ask the questions. So I'm glad you mentioned that, John. The other thing that led us to do immediately that following, this was last year, in June, was to participate in Wear Orange. And a group of folks in church got together and said, we need to do Wear Orange. And I was pretty impressed with the number of people who wore orange. Like, it was noticeable enough that it was like another little mini day of Pentecost where we asked people to wear red, but it was vibrant orange hues. And the altar flowers were actually in orange, which was something that we got from St. Ambrose and Cassandra Deck Brown. The altar flowers were orange that day for gun violence prevention. Wear Orange, which is in June. And that was an easy way for people to do something meaningful who might have felt uncomfortable doing something more, and to start a larger conversation. So if you're afraid of having the conversation, or you need to start small and feel the waters, inviting people to wear orange on Sunday morning for that weekend in June. And Christine, I think, has shared resources in the chat box. And inviting the Altar Guild to consider orange flowers for the altar as part of that on that Wear Orange weekend in June. That's something that's fairly easy and most people can get on board with, I think, if you're looking for it. Other questions from the group?
That's all we had in the chat, Sonny.
Anybody want, Cassandra, I see that you've unmuted. You could.
I just wanted to actually make St. Andrews aware. I actually sit on a different task force that is federal based. And it's the Public Safety Partnership, which is centered around gun violence prevention. And the Greensboro Police Department is actually a participant in that program. It's a 3-year program. They have 1-year extension, provided they can keep their grants. We'll see where that goes. But right now they're in it. This is their 3rd year, but they have another year extension. And one of the efforts that they do have is a focus around community engagement. This would probably be a great opportunity for you all to reach out to the Greensboro Police Department.
We've talked about that, yeah. What's the name of the task force or the program again?
It's called Public Safety Partnership, PSP for short.
Public Safety Partnership. Okay.
But Chief Thompson, matter of fact, we meet every other Monday, so we met this week.
Okay.
And my role is to be the liaison between the department and the federal part of it. And so they are doing quite a bit. They're, knock on wood, their gun violence is down. And as you know, probably they've lost 2 officers to gun violence.
Yes.
In the last 2 years. So, but the community engagement part, and there's a Letitia McNeil who actually works out of the city office.
The community safety, the city
Yes.
office, community safety, Letitia McNeil.
McNeil, and they work in collaboration to meet with community and identify additional ways in partnership to address gun violence.
Thank you very much.
One of the themes that I've noticed is that with the churches who have gotten things going in their own way and figuring out what worked best for them to start with is the relationship with police departments and law enforcement in some way, connecting with and awareness of what's going on, whether that was safety audits or regular police presence or establishing relationships with the neighborhood police who are on the beat in your community, so that they, as Sandy said, see it as a part of their network or a house that they can go into. So the building relationships with law enforcement is definitely being aware of what's going on in your community. Networking, I think, is another one where people have asked for help, and been willing to consult others and seek guidance from others. I mean, St. Andrews, Catherine made a list of several things that not just police, but using Sarah and North Carolinians Against Gun Violence as a resource. That was great. You could do a whole program with that. Sarah, you should probably put your email in the chat box so people can connect with you. You can also find her information at North Carolinians Against Gun Violence website as well. So looking at who are the outside resources, mentioning even another denomination, Presbyterian Church has a curriculum, the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. I think Christina's added that information, the link to the chat box as well. And if you click on any of these links, they'll open and be open after we close out the meeting on your browser. There are also resources available on the diocesan website under the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force that are curated there that you can encounter. And there is Sarah's email address if anyone would like that to get resources, statistics, how to be involved, sign up for notices from North Carolinians Against Gun Violence about some of the interesting, shall we say, bills and legislation that are being put forward in the halls of the General Assembly. Sarah has her finger on the pulse of it.
Thanks, Sunny. I put my email in the chat, and also somebody mentioned current legislation, and there are currently I think 5 bills that are either in committee or have been passed by one side of the legislature, but have not been passed by both sides. So a lot to keep track of and to advocate against. Unfortunately, these are all bills that would loosen regulations or allow firearms in more spaces like private schools in North Carolina. So would love for anyone who's interested. And there are a lot of great organizations, other advocacy organizations listed on the diocesan page that Christine shared as well. So lots of great ways to stay in the loop about what's happening in our state legislature, as well as what's happening federally.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other quick? Yes, Bishop Sam. Good.
Thank you, Sonny. Sorry, I'm having trouble. Can you hear me? Okay. Speaking of legislation, and this may have already been mentioned because I was having trouble with my connection tonight, but there is a press conference tomorrow sponsored by the North Carolina Council of Churches at noon. Sarah, I think your team is helping to make that possible. And religious leaders are going to be speaking about the permitless carry bill, the HB 5 SB 50 at noon tomorrow. So I unfortunately cannot be there. I have it was scheduled earlier when I could come, and then they had to change the time and I could not do it. But if any of the members of our task force are available to speak on our behalf, the team will help you with talking points. So just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Thanks, Bishop. Any other questions from panelists for each other, churches that have participated tonight, or anyone who's a participant? If y'all have questions for any of us, ask away. I think we cleared out all the questions that have been posted to the chat box. Christine is saying yes. A lot of good resources there if you want to save those before we close out our meeting. Okay. There are no other questions for the evening. I hope you've all seen a lay of the land of what churches are here tonight who are actively engaging in different ways with gun violence prevention, and connect with one another, start to network and ask each other questions. I'm happy to email, converse, text with me or anyone else here if you have questions about how to get conversations started in your churches, or try something new if you've been doing something and you'd like to step out into advocacy that Catherine mentioned. That's something that we've done a bit of at All Saints, and participating in the diocese postcard program. That is easy to do, and actually had a lot of people participate this year who were very eager to share with our state representatives and senators what they were concerned about. So it's easy to do nothing. So choose to do something. And there are so many ways that you can jump in and start and ask the questions with building connections with your police, law enforcement. But starting somewhere, I think, is the important thing. And that might look different in your, or will look different in your context than it will for other people. So listen and find out what's going on in your community and take action. Bishop, do you have any closing words or comments for the group tonight? I'll give you the chance for that. You too.
Thanks, Sonny. I do want to thank not just our panelists, but the congregations you represent for the leadership that you're demonstrating and exercising in our diocese and in the church, and for setting an example, for asking the right questions and diving in and networking with each other and sharing your stories tonight, which really helps get the word out in terms of how congregations can participate, can get involved, can take that first step if they haven't yet. So thank you for being leaders, role models, and for sharing your story with all of us tonight. And we will share out this recording for people that could not be with us.
Yeah, I ditto for that, Bishop. Thank you all for being brave in your churches, and for your parishioners in your churches for being brave to have hard conversations. It would be easy not to have them. So thank you for being brave to have them in your context. Thank you. So if there are no more questions, then I will close us out with the Easter blessing and bid you all have a restful night. The God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ, the great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant, make you perfect in every good work to do God's will, working in you that which is well pleasing in his sight. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you this night and remain with you forever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace
Thank
be.
you.